Got Jason in Denver.
Hey guys, that was pretty funny, I'll have to admit.
I thought we were actually going to get into discussion. By the way, for the guys in the booth, after this call, hang up on anybody who's not a theist. There you go. We're taking theist callers for the rest of the show.
If they're there.
If they're there.
Yep.
Well, first of all, I do respect you guys, and in regards to specific gods and religion, I agree with you. I just have not been convinced when it comes to the idea of a creator or a designer from the very get-go of creation.
You've not been convinced what?
I haven't been convinced of the atheist position.
The atheist position is that we haven't been convinced that there is one.
Right.
So you haven't been
convinced
that you're not
convinced. That's my point.
So you're convinced there is?
Yes.
Why?
All right. Here's my my argument, and I'm interested in your feedback. The DNA basically, all scientists agree that the DNA is a code, right?
No.
It's an information code.
I'll go with that.
We'll let it slide, but
I'll go with that.
Here's go ahead. I'll get to it. Continue.
Okay. Now I've heard it described many times as a instruction set or a blueprint or a code. All these information, that's what I've been told.
Run with it.
Okay. So based on all the evidence that we have as humans here on Earth and in our universe, we should infer that, let me say it this way, all codes that we have knowledge of are intelligently designed, right?
No.
Codes that we have knowledge of.
Well, if I'm going to grant your first premise that DNA is a code, then I can't possibly grant the second one that all codes we have knowledge of are intelligently designed.
Well, that's my.
You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Honestly.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. Saying that DNA is a code is an analogy. This idea that it is a code, you can't then say all other codes that we know of were created by an intelligence, therefore this code was created by intelligence. That doesn't work. It's an argument from analogy. And so if you start your argument by saying DNA is a code, and I'm willing to grant that premise for the sake of argument, I can't then grant your second claim that all codes have an intelligent author, because now you've got no work to do.
Well, I know, but see, the reason you can't grant that second one is because you don't agree with it. But my point is that's why I'm...
No, because you haven't demonstrated an intelligent designer behind the code that I'm willing to accept.
All the evidence that we have says that yes, there's information in these molecules, right? But all evidence is that we can go back to our parents and say, well, this is how that molecule got assembled from pieces of our parents' molecule, and all the way back. So where's God in all this?
By the way, DNA is chemistry. H2O is a code. A water molecule is a code. Granted, it's not self-replicating chemicals, but there are others as well. To say that it's a code is an analogy that helps people understand it. To then take that and conflate that to say that therefore it must also have an intelligent designer is a logical fallacy.
No, my point is that the DNA, I'm not even talking about the physical properties of it as much as I'm talking about the DNA. It had to be infused with information.
No, it is information. Correct. In the sense of the analogy, not infused with, is.
Well, how did the information get into the DNA code? It had to be put there.
It's not.
It is.
And
this is the problem when you're arguing from analogy. Mm-hmm. Okay? How did the information get there? No, you're not understanding. It didn't get there. It is. You're beginning by saying, hey, let's look at this and call it a code. Okay, fine. How did it become a code? I'll tell you how. Because you looked at it and called it a code.
Okay. Now let me explain. You're saying that the DNA code, we can't just say that it just got there because that's an analogy. When my point is that when we look at anything else that compares to the DNA information, whether we look at a blueprint, whether we look at information that's being created, we see a designer behind it. And
No.
so I'm saying that whenever we look at something else,
I told you where the code comes from, or where the information comes from. It comes from our parents, or it comes from the previous organisms that existed.
of course, but I'm just talking about the original set of
one.
information that went in. I'm not talking about what's happening
These are
now.
molecules that act as enzymes, which influences the ability of that molecule to help the creation of additional copies of that molecule. And so you end up with this arms race where all these different molecules are competing for all the little pieces out there to create copies of themselves. And there's a potential for variation, because there can be copy mistakes. There can be gamma rays that come down and alter the DNA.
Yes.
And
I understand.
And so
I understand.
once you have one thing that can replicate itself or influence the replication of itself, you have this runaway chain reaction, and you have the potential to create life from that sort of thing.
There's an additional problem, and then I'll let you continue.
Okay. Well,
And
let me explain, because what
I
you
said,
guys have been
hang
describing.
on. I said there's an additional problem, and then I'll let you continue.
Okay.
The additional problem is that even if we were to grant all of this, you've got one big argument from induction. It's inductive reasoning to say, because we've seen this in every other case, this must also be the case in this new case that we've discovered. That's not true. It is a logical fallacy to assert that it must necessarily be the case. To say that it perhaps is more likely the case, that's a different story.
Okay, but is not, let me explain this, is not the very scientific method that we use based on inductive reasoning. When we see something and we say, okay, this is the way it works here, this is the way it works here, this is the way it works here, and we see something else that resembles that,
and then we go do experiments to
would it not
verify
be
it, and
reasonable?
we have to replicate those experiments. So induction is part of the process, but it's verified by experimentation and repeated experiments, those sorts of things.
When we talk about whether something is true or likely true, it's the result of deductive reasoning and testing. We can say, for example, I've dropped this pin 1,000 times before, and it's always fallen to the table, so inductively I'm going to predict that it's going to fall again. But that's not just an application of inductive reasoning. It's not just an argument from analogy. What it is it's a predictive element of a scientific theory. That predictive element is the result of deductive reasoning, of testing, of having an understanding about reality. What do we lose?
Okay.
We lost the mic.
Are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Now, I don't have any direct quotes from scientists, but I would love to hear what you guys think the DNA is, because I've heard it directly described as a code. It's not just like a code, it is a code.
It's a helical molecule. You can't hear me. It's a helical molecule that has a possibility of having different base pairs at each step in the helix, and nothing more than that.
Okay. So what I'm describing is not so much. See, what you guys were talking about was evolution, basically. Saying this happens and this comes together. I'm not even talking about the system of evolution, whether it works or not. I believe it does. I'm saying the very original information that had to go into the very first code.
And I'm saying that is a silly question, in much the same way that there are people who would say, please provide proof or evidence that atheism is true. Well, atheism isn't an ism that's positing some position, so the question is bad. And when you ask a question of where did that information originally come from that was put into it, there wasn't information put into it. It is information. Where did the original molecules, where did the original self-replicating molecules come from? We don't know for sure, but we have a number of ideas, and we have demonstrated that it is possible to produce the basic building blocks of life in the laboratory, that the basic building blocks of simple amino acids, etc., can come from non-living material under the right circumstances. We already know this is possible. Now, how did it happen specifically in this case on Earth? We don't know. But there's no reason to assert that an intelligent being was behind it, or that an intelligent being is even necessary to consider the question. Because there was no intelligent being behind the creation of those building blocks in the laboratory.
Okay. Now you're saying that the information is there, but what I'm saying is it's not just random information. It's specified information.
Oh, for crying out loud. What difference does that make? Did I say it was random information?
Well, no, but that's my point. I'm saying specified information. We have evidence and proof that anytime we see specified information, it comes from a designer.
You know, if
Wow.
I talked about...
You're not even listening.
No,
We responded with detailed explanations to try to redirect the question, and what you come back with is the same thing you've come back with 3 or 4 times before.
You keep saying we don't know, but
I said we don't know in this specific case where the original material that formed life on Earth came from. But there is no necessary justification for claiming that there must have been an intelligent designer. Because despite your appeal, your argument by analogy to say all other codes we've run across, they've had an intelligent designer, the fact of the matter is the basic building blocks of life have been produced in a laboratory without an intelligent designer.
Yes, just like you can put a bunch of letters together and throw them into a bin, you won't get a dictionary.
Wow.
You know, we have a very big Earth, right? We have trillions, I don't know how many molecules on the Earth, right? We have lots of possible heat sources, right? We got the core of the Earth generating heat vents. We have lightning. We have the sunlight.
This is describing evolution.
What?
You're describing evolution,
No,
not the original
I'm describing abiogenesis.
Right. Yeah, I'm not talking about that.
You're talking about abiogenesis. That's what he said he's describing. Do you not know what abiogenesis is? It means abiogenesis, the origins of life.
Okay, but you're using examples like the heat and the different aspects of the Earth that's already there. It's already existing.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
I've always wanted to ask this question because I really don't understand. Why is it so important to have a beginning creator or an intelligent designer? Why is that so important? Why is that?
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that it's so important unless the evidence is pointing in that direction. Then we have to use what we have.
But if the evidence doesn't lean one way or the other, then why? I mean, it sounds to me like you're kind of bending.
Well, what my point is that we have lots of evidence that shows us that any time that anything's structured with that has specified information, a code, anything like that, that we have intelligence behind it. And I'm saying, why all of a sudden, in the case of the DNA, do we not use the evidence presented for us and say, okay, yeah, we should assume this. We should assume that this is information from a designer.
Why do you want to just stop there, though?
Because once that information is put into the system, then the system works. The evolution, as you guys have been describing, how it comes together, how species develop.
It works regardless.
So you don't.
No, but I'm saying the initial information going in. That's the only question I have.
You don't think nature could possibly create a molecule that was self-replicating?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's the creation of the self-replicating molecule. That's where you have information that has to go in that was not there, that has to be created.
No, it has to be created, right? It has to have arisen, right? Right. So it existed at some point, right? So the debate is how it came to exist, right? Did God come down and wave a magic wand and it happened,
right?
Or
or an alien?
We're talking a molecule. I think in one scientific paper that's about 50 base pairs long, right? These things assemble themselves like beads. They naturally assemble. If you have the constituents in large enough quantities, right, the amino acids in large enough quantities, how strange is it to assemble a molecule in a bead-like fashion that has the right 50 things? Well, maybe it's pretty rare, but I'm arguing that if you have enough time and enough of the material sitting around, and you have enough places on the earth where that can happen, it's bound to happen. And actually scientists are a little surprised that that life didn't evolve separately in many different ways, because it's such a likely thing given the number of molecules on the earth and the potential heat sources that could drive this reaction. So I guess my point is, we have all of the pieces for life to begin. Mm-hmm. We don't have the exact replica of how it happened or where it happened or these sorts of things. But if you look at all the problems that had to arise for life to begin, we can. There are fairly simplistic scientific ways in which this might have happened, or explanations where it might have happened naturally, right? Mm-hmm. So my question is, why would you want to throw away a naturalistic explanation that reduces things to simpler things, right? All we're talking about is heat sources, mm-hmm. the atmosphere, and the chemical elements that are available on the earth, right? So,
right.
Big deal, right?
So, yeah, the reason is because, from my understanding, we can line up, and I'm not a scientist myself, I acknowledge that. I've been trying to study this. Mm-hmm. But from my understanding, if you take all the information, if you take all the amino acids, you take all the proteins, whatever, and you put them in all the right positions and everything, life doesn't just happen. There has to be an input. There has to be an input of information to start the ball rolling.
There's a notion of selection, right? So within evolution, and even in this abiogenesis thing that I've been talking about, there's a notion of when you get the right combination through one way or the other, either from a parent or from magically assembling this molecule, you end up with some sort of selection in the sense that it does something, right? It repeats, it propagates, it reproduces itself.
Okay,
and
I guess that's the crux of the matter.
It is kind of magic, right? I see why it's kind of a big thing, right? It is magical in the sense that from then on it takes over. It has a life of its own. Whether it's a conscious thing or whether it's an intelligent thing, I would strongly disagree. But it's something that once you have something recreating itself, right, in some other form, like in the sense of this molecule of enabling another molecule like itself to be created, to be assembled from those pieces that are sitting around, right? You get this runaway reaction, right? And you get many copies of this molecule.
Right.
And then, maybe there's some mistakes. Maybe some of these other molecules that are competing can do it better, can maybe cannibalize some of the first ones.
Right.
And so you get this natural competition in a sense. It's not a conscious competition, but they're competing with each other for these resources of these molecules, and the better ones win out. And this is a runaway thing, and this ultimately explains the diversity and complexity of life on this planet. It's a pretty wonderful thing, I'll grant you, and it is kind of jaw-dropping in the sense that of all of the complexity that we see is really pretty amazing, and that's what's so awesome about biology, right?
Mm-hmm. It is absolutely amazing.
So yeah. There's some good books out that I believe would address this. I'm willing to bet The Greatest Show on Earth by Richard Dawkins talks about this. I'm willing to bet.
Jerry Coyne's Why Evolution is True. There is, this is something that is not completely understood, not well understood. You've already said that you don't understand it. Clearly, I don't have a complete understanding of it, or maybe even we could argue I don't even have a rudimentary understanding of it. The point is, if you don't understand it, then you certainly are in no position to assert that it couldn't have happened without an intelligence. And this argument from analogy, once upon a time, this argument from analogy took a different form. It was, our bodies are basically machines, and every machine we've ever seen was designed by somebody. Mm-hmm. So therefore, this machine was designed by somebody. Mm-hmm. Clearly, that's not true. Clearly, that is not a valid and sound argument to make. Mm-hmm. And so once it became obvious that wasn't the case, that we could point around to other things that could be analogous to machines, now they take a step backwards. And now this DNA, it's a code. I swear, if you just drop that word from your vocabulary when you're discussing this, so that you're not prejudicing how you view DNA, and actually go in and say what it is, what the science says about it, I don't think you'll have the problem with it that you were having.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, Matt's making the point that the word code carries with it some baggage, right? It presupposes that it's a purposeful thing, and now I understand why Matt objected to the term earlier. It's certainly information in the sense that the string of base pairs, is unique and is different than the others, and can be reduced to some sort of, binary code or binary. Here I use the word again, binary representation, that sort of thing. So it is information. So, but I do understand your point. It's almost like the question. It's very analogous to the question of who created the universe, right? The question presupposes a who, right? When the proper question is, how did the universe come to exist, right? That's the proper question.
So except for that we don't have any other comparisons as we would with a code. But I understand what Matt's saying, and I think that's a good thing for me to consider.
One other little tiny thing on that is this idea of information. It's an incredibly ill-defined term, and the reason it falls apart in this analogy is that you could, for example, and ancient people did, look at the way the earth moves, the sun moves, and the stars moves as conveying information. But because we know when the sun is in this position at this time of year, it's time to plant crops. You could view that as conveying information because you're getting a piece of information where the sun is, and you're able to then determine what position the sun's likely to be in at a different time. When is it going to be summertime? So you could construct an analogy that the movement of the very planets, the movement of everything in the heavens is conveying information. But that in no way, that argument from analogy, in no way justifies claiming that it was done by a thinking being with an intent to convey information. It is us who draw the information from it in the same way that the self-replicating molecules draw that information. It is not passing a message like a cryptic cipher or something. And I think couching it in that language is what tends to confuse people. But Jason, I appreciate the call. Thanks a lot for giving us something fun to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, man.